Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for August 18th, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Brendan, I have made people very internet mad at me over this movie.
We wouldn't be film critics in the world of film Twitter if we didn't make somebody mad at least on a daily basis.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, I try to, and you know this about me, most of our listeners might know this about me. I tend to avoid the controversy, right? I don't try to create conflict. I don't have time.
I mean, that's the thing. You don't try, but sometimes the lack of trying is what actually creates conflict in the first place.
Yeah, that's very true, especially on the internet. All you have to do is tweet an opinion or post an opinion, and people may come after you. And this doesn't happen for me all that often, even though I've certainly posted, tweeted some opinions that I do know are against the grain, but either people ignore me or they laugh at me. They continue to scroll. That's usually how it goes most of the time. But for whatever reason, today when I was posting about Alien Romulus, boy, did it reach the depths of Twitter. And
gosh, this makes me afraid for this entire episode now.
I imagine they're not going to listen. Most of our listeners are level-headed. They like the banter. They want us to discuss the nuance. And that's the funny thing about that tweet is that I wasn't even bashing the movie. I was actually very complimentary.
Yeah, and even our editor-in-chief, Dave Giannini, even commented on that and the irony of how positive that your tweet technically was.
Yes.
So that's what makes it so hilarious that you actually got called effing stupid by a few people. It just baffles me.
On a tweet that I was positive on.
Mm-hmm.
I might not have loved the movie like some others have, clearly, but I wasn't even being negative.
Honestly, in a way, I find this hilarious that you had to go through that type of experience online. In a way, I'm also glad you did, because I think it is emblematic of how the Alien franchise has sort of created two separate fandoms in a way, and each of those demographics, if you will, have a certain loyalty and a commitment to that loyalty to different facets of the franchise, and they will defend it. And that is certainly representative of the comments that you got on that tweet. So we may talk about that a little bit further, given our thoughts on the film and the franchise as a whole.
Absolutely. But on the other end of that coin, there were a lot of others that did agree with my sentiment. So as we get into the conversation, Brendan, you and I are certainly not alone in our feelings on this film.
Right.
So I am excited to dive into this film. And to reiterate, for some context, in case you are new to the show here, we are, like everyone else on the planet, we are big fans of Alien and Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
I like the assembly cut of Alien 3. I think,
same
Brendan,
here.
you do as well.
I do. I think it's a very good movie.
Brendan has had a revelation on Resurrections this last week.
I like that movie now. I used to hate that movie, and I do wonder if it's the context or just the circumstances of Hollywood filmmaking nowadays that makes that movie seem better in retrospective, because it's just this weird thing that you don't see get made anymore. And I've come to really appreciate that.
I admittedly have not seen that film in years. So
Gotcha.
it is due for a rewatch. I will say, though, as of the last I saw Resurrections, I loathed it. I am not
know
a
a
big
lot of people
fan,
do.
but
Yeah.
it's one of those that I could come around on in some way, shape, or form on a revisit. And you're right. I think there is something about going back to these films that are from a Hollywood that is certainly not recognizable today.
Yeah.
Like going back and watching films from that era that do feel different, that have bold
Yeah.
risk in them. That
They hired the director of Delicatessen and The City of Lost Children to make an Alien movie, and Jean-Pierre Jeunet basically makes a Jean-Pierre Jeunet movie, which is absolutely wild to me.
yeah, and look, it doesn't always work out, of course.
No, it doesn't. You're right, but you've come to you start to appreciate that more so when we live in a world where we're getting more content than we are movies, and I think
Exactly.
that's the
Yeah,
biggest
that's
thing.
it. And that's why I'm really excited to go and check that out. I don't know if I'll feel any different. Maybe I won't, but I am
Yeah, I don't
curious
know.
to go and revisit that film. As for Prometheus, Brendan and I are mixed on that as well. The craft is sublime, of course. Ridley Scott is always great in terms
Mhm.
of production value and the
Movie looks
performances of
amazing.
that film. It looks great.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some writing issues that I do think are warranted.
Yeah, Prometheus is the movie from this franchise I really want to love, but I just can't quite get there.
Yeah.
I think it's the movie that has the best intent, or at least the most interesting intent out of any film here, just given what it's trying to go for. It's just, for me, that movie has always felt like 2 hours of mythology dumping, basically simply
Yeah.
introducing questions that don't become interesting in that particular movie. It
Yeah.
almost feels like what would normally be the first 20 to 30 minutes of an act one, except by the time you get to that end point, it's 2 hours long and then the end credits start rolling. That's basically what it
Yeah.
feels like to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I've seen this several different times over the course of the last week. There's a recent Twitter trend, at the very least. I'm sure this is
Mhm.
applicable across other social medias as well. But you scroll through Twitter and there's inevitably someone saying something to the effect of, I watched this movie and I can't believe people hate it, or vice versa.
It's basically
Which
the way of saying,
it's this
I
blanket
can't believe
statement.
people are not the exact same person as me.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's always very funny to me. And look, if you're being facetious with it, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
But because it's Twitter, you're not sure if people are being facetious or if they're just that obtuse. I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's just a matter of feeling insecure that their opinion was not shared by
Yes,
someone else.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've seen a lot of that, especially for Prometheus. I
Yeah.
watched Prometheus and I can't believe that people walked out of that and not liking it. And
Mhm.
here's the thing with movies, there's this little thing called nuance,
There's a little
variation,
thing called opinions. We all have 'em.
opinions. We all
and
have them. Like, it's perfectly okay. Like, and look, my favorite film of all time is Citizen Kane.
sure.
If you don't like it, that's okay. That is your opinion, and you
we'd
know
like
what?
to hear what those
You're
reasons
entitled
are.
to it. Like, contrast to popular theory, you are allowed to have your own opinion, and also, even if it goes against the grain.
Well,
A lot of people might consider Citizen Kane one of the best movies of all time, but if you don't, that's okay.
yeah.
That is
Well,
your opinion.
to bring this back to the Alien franchise, I think what's really interesting about that reaction you saw on Twitter regarding Prometheus, people saying, I can't believe people would dislike this movie. When it comes to Alien Covenant, I saw both examples happening simultaneously. People saying, I can't believe people would dislike this. Then other people saying the exact opposite. I can't believe people like this movie. And to
Yeah.
add further nuance to that, We have two people on this podcast right now, you and I, that have
Yeah.
different opinions on Alien Covenant.
We're split on Covenant, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the thing with Prometheus, it does look great. Absolutely. It is a visually wondrous film, but I think there's a warranted conversation to be had about the writing of that film. I don't think it always works. I agree with you. I think it's a little philosophizing and in a way that isn't always interesting. I do think it's a little banal, and I think it's okay to have that conversation. It's okay to watch that movie even through a 2024 lens and walk away feeling a little disappointed. I think there is value to that criticism. There's merit to that criticism.
Yeah.
Even in 2024. And same thing with Covenant. I think you can walk away feeling that the nihilism of that film is maybe a little overwhelming and undeserved.
It's suffocating for you, and I find it fascinating. That's just the difference there. And that's perfectly fair. We've talked about Covenant quite a bit. It might be one of those movies that you and I just never find ourselves at peace with. But it is in response to Alien Romulus, I actually did end up liking Covenant more as I thought about the franchise, and we'll talk maybe a little bit more about why that is. But yeah, it's like that's one of those movies where we're like, I don't think you're wrong with the way you feel about Covenant. It's just a very interesting thing. It's actually really interesting how the Alien franchise, individual films, they've all had some form of reevaluation as time has gone on. I mean, people are now going back and even saying, like myself included, Alien Resurrection is actually kind of a fun movie. And like each movie, I feel like has had that kind of resurgence in its own way. And I find that's what's so fascinating about this franchise in general, is the way that people look back on it now in retrospect.
Absolutely. And that's why a lot of this is a time capsule. It's a conversation and an insight into where we're at now with these films and these filmmakers. I wholeheartedly believe that Romulus in another 20 to 30 years will have its reevaluation.
I think so. Yeah.
People come around on it or not. We'll see.
Maybe we will. If we're playing our cards a little bit early already. I feel like we've sort of alluded to the fact that you and I, we don't love Alien Romulus. We'll get into the reasons why. But I do wonder if I'll also be part of that trend, maybe 20 and 30 years, when I look back on this film and think, you know what, this came out at the right time, given what it's doing. It's actually more interesting now.
And I do think that is very possible for me, simply for one aspect of the film that we'll get into.
Sure.
However, I also look at the other end of that coin and the cross section of where I come to Romulus, of what makes it frustrating for me. And there's a world where I see myself never coming around to the aspect of the films the aspect to this film that I don't like.
Yeah.
But the aspects that I do, oh my God. Oh my goodness. I look forward to talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
me too.
It does make Romulus a fascinating subject for a reevaluation as time goes on. It'll be extremely compelling, and I do look forward to seeing the evolution of this film as it goes. So, to the internet haters, I guess, if they're listening, and I don't think they are, but
if they are, maybe come back in 20 or 30 years, we'll actually apologize to you, saying y'all were right.
Well, here's the thing. Again, this is a little bit of a time capsule into where we're at now with this movie.
Sure.
But also, this is like, our conversations are not founded in extremism, at least not most of the time. There's some sort of variance at play, nuance, the texture of a movie. I like to get into it all.
Yeah, and they're also not absolute. We've talked about that many times. Yeah. I think it was Roger Ebert that once said, ratings and your feelings about movies, they're all relative, never absolute.
Yep.
And we're privy to that. We're aware of that. We've come around on many movies over the past 10 years of In Session Film where we openly acknowledge we made a mistake when we first thought about that movie, or we weren't in the right headspace when we first reviewed that movie.
And you evolve.
Yeah, and that's not to say the same thing will happen here with Alien Romulus, but there is something about this movie, just given the divisiveness of it already, that maybe it will have a certain reinterpretation in the years to come in a way that's almost like a Scream movie in a way, right? Like,
Sure.
is it doing something that maybe we can congratulate it on? I don't know. I don't know if that'll be the case,
Yeah.
but it's interesting to talk about.
Absolutely. All right. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into Alien Romulus. It is directed by Fede Álvarez. It stars Kaylee Spaney, David Johnson, Archie Renault, Isabella Merced, Spike Fern, and Aileen Wu. If you are not familiar with Alien Romulus, I assume most of you are, but just in
Yeah.
case, while scavenging the deep ends of a space station, a group of young space colonists come face to face with the most terrifying life form in the universe. I feel like that synopsis is applicable for all of the Alien movies.
Which is
Good job.
funny. Yeah, it's funny that that's the plot synopsis given, the greatest hits aspect of this movie as well. So it basically is the plot of every Alien movie ever made in
Yeah,
some ways.
there is some
It
fun irony there. Yeah,
maybe it's more self-aware than we're giving it credit for.
maybe. All right,
Okay,
Brendan,
maybe
what
it
did
is
you
ahead of the
think
curve.
about Alien Romulus?
Well, I guess let's first off state a couple things. Given the specifics of where this movie goes and how to, I guess, best articulate our frustrations with it, there will be some spoilers later on during this conversation. We're going to have to get
Sure.
into some specifics here. We'll make that warning known when we get to that point. I also do want to note once again, you may recall this, JD. Alien Romulus was in my top 5 most anticipated films of the year. And
Oh,
the
yes, that is correct.
and the thing that really excited me about it was director Fede Álvarez. I think his work on movies like Evil Dead and Don't Breathe, like the synergy of those two movies, I think would have been a perfect fit for the Alien franchise. And after seeing Alien Romulus, I still think he is the perfect director for this franchise. I
Mm,
just don't know if I fully saw his potential come through just yet. I really feel like with Alien Romulus, the reaction I had was more comparable to Fede Alvarez's work on something like The Girl in the Spider's Web, which was not a very good film, but it just felt so heavily compromised. And I feel the same way about Alien Romulus. It just feels like a very compromised film. This is, of course, 20th Century Studios now under the ownership of Disney, the Hollywood monopoly, as we call them. And
yeah.
they are doing a pretty interesting thing going back to some of 20th Century Fox's old properties and revisiting franchises like Prey when they did that a few years ago, The First Omen earlier this year, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I will at least give them credit for revitalizing these franchises by giving filmmakers some interesting things to do. Because
Yeah.
there are some very interesting things in Alien Romulus, mostly in its filmmaking. I think the film is so well made. It is a gorgeous looking movie. I think the budget was only around 80 million, and it's probably the best looking movie of the year so far in a way. Like, I mean, of course,
Yeah.
we had movies like Furiosa and Dune Part 2, of course, that are larger in scope and scale in a very different way. But there's something about the practicality and the sliminess of Alien Romulus that I really appreciated. There's a sequence where the characters find themselves in a situation that's pretty reminiscent of the night vision sequence in Don't Breathe. But in this case, it involves face huggers. There are a few moments and a few shots where it almost seemed as though the face huggers were clearly being controlled by remote control cars or something like that. And like, it actually didn't look good, and that's what made it look good. Like, it had this almost throwback old school tangibility to it that I really did appreciate, which is why I wanted to love the movie so much more than I actually did. And for reasons we'll get into, I think it really is it's the Disney overseeing of it all. The fact that this is a movie that constantly says and comments on itself being what's in the best interest of the company. Maybe that's why this movie will actually age fairly well with time. I do wonder if it's a movie that's actually having a conversation with itself. I I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah.
Um, Needless to say, the reaction I have to it right now is it it just doesn't have the thematic bite or the subtext or the boldness that I appreciate from this franchise. And I just don't, and I don't just mean the philosophizing of Prometheus or Covenant. I mean how every film in this franchise has had some type of deep underlining thematic thought. And I just don't think this one has it really at all. And if it does have anything, I feel like it's something that other films in this franchise have already explored in some way. And to call this kind of a greatest hits montage of the Alien franchise, I do think that's kind of apt. And it makes it feel like a pretty passionless one, if I'm being honest, especially given what I really wanted to see Fede Álvarez do. And I still think he can really cook with this franchise. I just don't think this was the film, or at least this wasn't the opportunity to allow him to do that just yet.
Yeah, Alien Romulus is one of the most frustrating experiences of the year, hands down. And not because it's bad, but because it completely squanders its exquisite spectacle.
Yeah.
The production and sound design, the cinematography, the visual effects of this film, with a few dreadful exceptions aside.
Oh, we'll get to that.
Extraordinary. There is a transportative tangibility to this film that is so foreign when compared to most modern blockbusters today that the only way you can describe it is Alien.
Yeah.
It's remarkably refreshing given how most summer fare is suffocated in what we usually call the CGI soup. The craft here is immersive. The use of light and shadow is intuitive. The production of Jackson's star is lived in. It's simply one of the best looking films of the year. Not to mention the performances are quite good, especially Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson. Johnson probably being the MVP here, but Isabella Merced is noteworthy as well. Yeah. Just wish that there was more of an emphasis on her character and the writing, which, speaking of, the screenplay here is extremely vapid. This is a franchise that defines itself on taking risk and being bold. Alien and Aliens are both masterpieces, and not just because they're effective sci-fi thrillers, but because they're just as rich in theme and symbolism. Say what you will about Alien 3, but it takes some audacious swings. Same thing with Prometheus and Covenant. I may not have liked those movies, but it is vividly clear that Ridley Scott is interested in other things beyond superficial thrill.
Yeah.
Romulus, on the other hand, frivolously decides to be about nothing. There's nothing subversive about it. There's very little that is challenging. And by the time that it is, it's too late. It's late minute risk are feeble and trivial. A lot of people have been comparing this to The Force Awakens, which I think is a little disingenuous, or a lot disingenuous.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty baffling comparison.
The Force Awakens evokes the familiar in order to do something subversive. That is a movie that is actively flipping the coin. Romulus is just a regurgitation. As you noted, Brennan, it is playing the hits, and it does not do much beyond that. Yeah. There might be attempts at trying to say something or having some sort of thematic nuance here. And I did get into some of those discussions on Twitter today. People are trying to grab onto something with this film, but I find those attempts hollow. I think it is empty in terms of value. And that is my biggest frustration because, again, it is one of the best crafted films of the year. Hands down.
Really is. It deserves awards for cinematography and set direction and art direction, all of those things.
And sound. I don't know if you saw this in IMAX as I did.
I did not.
This experience in IMAX was breathtaking. In terms of the craft, it was utterly breathtaking.
Yeah, that does not surprise me, and that's what makes the film so frustrating as well for me. If the film does have any thematic bite, I have seen a few people comment on how it could be about maybe our relationship with AI nowadays, but I do wonder if that's maybe just the landscape of now feeding into our thoughts on this movie, because the interplay between Rain and Andy, played by Kaylee Spaney and David Johnson respectively, I guess it's no secret to say that Andy is a synthetic, and the
Yes.
circumstances around how this synthetic has been there to protect Rain's family, or at least protect Rain through her father and all of that. It does raise some potential questions on our relationship with AI and whether that could be something that's positive, maybe it could be something trustworthy. And I will at least give the film credit for maybe tackling it in a more familial way, but that same question, I think, was already explored in this franchise before, because the movie Aliens, James Cameron's film, did kind of flip that script with the Bishop character. Now, it wasn't
Yeah.
a familial thing, but it did get into similar questions on how regarding Ripley and her relationship with these synthetics, given her previous experience with Ash in the first movie.
Yeah.
So, like from a very high level standpoint, that same thematic idea has been represented in this franchise before. So it's hard to say the movie's still taking a thematic swing. And that's not to say like we don't necessarily need movies to have completely new thematic ideas in order to work. But the Alien franchise was sort of built on finding new perspectives and new ways of exploring thematic ideas with each film. And Romulus is exploring any ideas that may have already been done in this franchise before. And that's where I think it just feels in continuity with this franchise. That's where it feels hollow for me as well. I'm with you on that. And it left me, for lack of a better term, in a space related way. It left me cold. It really did, and I just felt so distanced by it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Again, and to be clear, as if anyone from my Twitter conversations earlier today is
They have a
listening to this,
personal
and they're
vendetta
not.
with you now. They're waiting for this episode so they can
They're
attack you some
not
more.
going. They're not going to be listening to this, so I don't even know why I am pretending. But to bring clarity to it, to a lot of what we were discussing in that thread, it's not that this film isn't attempting to have some sort of thematic bite. You are right. The film is clearly tackling AI, the relationships that these human characters have with these synthetics.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think the film is trying to explore the idea of how expendable these characters are to these giant corporations
Yeah.
that have been exposed in these movies. My issue isn't like, again, when I say that it's empty, it's not that it's like literally the film isn't doing
It's not
anything.
that it's not there.
It's that it's valueless. That's
Yeah.
why I use the word vapid. It offers nothing that is stimulated. It is dull. It is mundane. It's very superficial. It's hollow. Again, going back to that word, I just feel like the ideas that are being mined here are thin in execution.
Yeah.
They exist. I see them. I recognize them. I just don't think the film does anything interesting with those ideas. Rain and Andy, the connection between those two characters, and I do think from a dramatic, emotional perspective, the interactions that they have throughout the film
It's pretty
is
good.
pretty great. I
Yeah.
did enjoy that, especially when you couple it with the craft and everything we see in terms of the action and the urgency of the film. But what the film might be trying to say in terms of the thematic value of those characters, I don't think it's offering anything new that this franchise hasn't already tackled before in
I'm with you.
more
Yeah.
interesting and better ways.
Yeah.
That is my issue. That's why I say it's empty. Not that it's
Yeah.
not there or that it doesn't exist. It just has no value. There's no
you know, yeah.
calories to it.
It does make me wonder, would this movie seem more thematically insightful if we didn't ever see, let's say, Alien 3 or Resurrection or Covenant or Prometheus, movies that really did explore interesting thematic ideas, regardless if the films themselves were any good? Would we feel a little bit differently about this movie? I think it's just a case of how it fits in with the continuity of this franchise that it feels more empty, because it is that it's not just a narrative regurgitation of this franchise, that greatest hits thing that we talked about. It is also a thematic regurgitation.
Yes.
And the beauty of science fiction, any sci-fi film that comes out, is that it's able to provoke some type of new thought. It doesn't have to be a complicated thought, but it tries to get you to have a dialogue with the situation at hand, with the ramifications
Yes.
at hand. And all Alien Romulus did to me was make me think back on the exact same things it might be tackling from previous films in this same franchise. And that's where it's frustrating. Like I mentioned earlier, that if there is something potentially interesting here, it's that maybe the film is secretly having this meta commentary with itself. I think it was in Matt Singer's review for Romulus where he made the analogy of a sort that each film in the Alien franchise almost serves as like some type of deconstruction of the movie that came directly before it. And I think that he's right. Each film, whether it be Alien 3, Resurrection, of course with Prometheus and Covenant, each film looks back on the previous movie that directly preceded it and kind of comments on that. Especially a movie like Covenant that almost retroactively tries to fix the lack of xenomorphs from Prometheus in a way.
Yeah.
So is Alien Romulus looking back on Covenant and Prometheus and saying, y'all didn't like the heavy philosophizing? We're just getting back to basics. So maybe the movie is still in keeping with that trajectory. I just don't know if I like that particular choice of deconstruction, if that makes sense. And that's
I agree. And there is certainly an aspect of that to this film, whether it be intentional or not. I don't know, but if you're going to hire someone like Fede Álvarez, that suggests to me that there's certainly going to be more of a priority on the horror versus the expansiveness that we've come to see with some of these other movies in this franchise. And this is getting back to basics. This is Alien all over again. It is a regurgitation of Alien, and not just in terms of the dialogue and the references we see that comes out because of the screenplay. And I know there's been a lot of back and forth on that, but it's also the imagery that we see throughout the film. There's a lot that this film is doing in terms of deconstructing, not just in terms of Ridley Scott's 1979 Alien, or to your point, how it is reverting against the massive philosophizing of Prometheus and Covenant. This is a film that's looking back at the entire franchise on the whole. There are callbacks to Aliens in this film. There's 1, 2, Alien 3 that is quite prominent.
There's something we'll talk about that's a direct riff on Alien Resurrection as well.
Absolutely. This is a film that is commenting on the entire franchise, not just the ones that came before it. And again, that's not my issue with the film. It is an execution. I don't think the film is doing anything interesting, but in that approach. And
I'm with you.
It feels like a hollow exercise in just the drama, the urgency. Let's entertain. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. This film did very well at the box office. I think it is the second best opening in the franchise's history. So it has been effective in terms of getting people in the seats. And by all accounts, a lot of people have been entertained. I think this has like an 81% in Rotten Tomatoes. The audience score, I think, is very good. A lot of people really do like this film. Brendan and I might be a little bit on an island, although as we addressed earlier, we're certainly not alone in sharing these criticisms. But I just feel like the Force Awakens-esque formula that this film is clearly riffing on, it just comes off very hollow. It doesn't feel subversive. It just feels like imitation. And I don't think it's always very good imitation. That's my issue. And sorry to ramble on here.
You're good.
Quickly to bounce off of what you're saying about the use of AI in this film and how the synthetics are utilized. Yes, we've seen that in other Alien movies. And if we're looking at this from a Force Awakens perspective, if this was doing something interesting, something subversive in the esque of The Force Awakens, which again was very actively flipping the coin, how does this film do that? It doesn't do that by introducing the Rook character, which we'll have to talk about in detail. We'll get into some spoilers with that. But the Rook character doesn't do anything that is in contrast to where Rain ultimately goes in this film.
He's an exposition dumper.
Exactly. It feels like there is a vacuousness in terms of how are we going to weave these two characters together? And it just doesn't always make sense to me.
I think I heard in an interview, and I don't know if this is true, someone may have just been quoting it incorrectly just to start a narrative about it. But I think I heard that Fede Álvarez may have said the inclusion of the Rook character and who plays that character, who quote unquote plays that character, was actually Ridley Scott's idea. And if that were the case, it honestly wouldn't surprise me, because it seems like a very Ridley Scott thing to do for a film that he didn't direct, as if to say, hey, I know that people might not like this, so I want it to be in a film that I didn't direct. It almost kind of reminds me of the Replicant Rebellion scene from Blade Runner 2049, where one of them even says we're more human than human. It's so on the nose and a direct callback that it's almost like it's there because it's meant to be a distraction from the greatness that is Ridley Scott. I wonder if that is the case here. But needless to say, I agree with your criticisms on the Rook character and how he serves the movie. He's really just there to provide plot. That's really all he's there for. There's no reason that it had to be this particular individual coming back. And I don't know about you. I sadly knew that there was going to be a CGI recreation of someone for this movie. I didn't know who it was going to be, but I knew there was going to be one.
Yeah.
And weirdly, okay, so we're in spoilers. I guess we can just go ahead and start getting into the specifics.
Might as well.
Okay, so spoiler warning from here on out on Alien Romulus. While I didn't know who was coming back to be digitally recreated for this movie, knowing that was going to happen, my first thought was, oh, it's probably going to be Ian Holm. It just makes the most sense to be Ash. So like when he came in, there was no surprise. But even the lack of surprise is not the problem. The problem is the ethics of it. The fact that Ian Holm died, 4 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
And the utilization here, once again, for merely plot and callback just feels pretty ugly and pretty distasteful. And I think if you're going to do that, you at least need to have a purpose for it. And I felt so conflicted about it in the wrong way, if I'm being honest.
I completely agree. No, I'm completely with you. I don't think it was a great idea. I know the family agreed to it, but even so, it still feels gross and feckless.
With you.
But here's the other aspect to it, Brendan. Even if you remove the ethics of it, it is so horribly rendered. It looks
I don't know
terrible.
why. I do not know why Disney is so committed to doing these things in their movies and their shows. I mean, how many times has it looked good? How many times has it, like, there's maybe been a few times that it's looked pretty good.
It's been good, sometimes passable. The best I feel like I've seen it is with Sam Jackson and Captain Marvel. I thought that was quite effective.
That was good. Oh, I would say I didn't mind the visual of it when Luke Skywalker came into The Mandalorian. I thought that was actually pretty good.
I agree. Yeah, I didn't mind that either. But this one is especially bad because they're using an animatronic and then having to digitally give it a moving face.
Yeah, it's that synergy between practical and digital. It just does not work.
So bad. It's so bad. It's one thing when you have a living person that has skin that moves as they talk, as they move about, and you can digitally manipulate it to make it younger and seamless. But when it's an animatronic that doesn't have those things, it is much more challenging, clearly, because it's really bad. They also didn't have the budget as a major Marvel movie as well, right? This isn't a $200 million production, as you noted earlier. So
Right.
budget certainly could be part of the limitation, but the effect is absolutely ridiculously bad in a movie that is otherwise exquisite in its craft. That's
Yeah.
why it's the most
Well,
jarring, because
you know,
everything else is so good in terms of production value that to throw this in, like, I can't believe it got greenlit.
I
The fact
know,
they
I know.
passed, they said yes, that's okay, blows my mind.
There's so many ways that they could have gotten around it that didn't need to involve the physicality of Ash, or in this case, Rook, actually being there. It could have been maybe like a television projection or something like that. There are different avenues they could have done if they needed this character to come back, but you didn't necessarily need Ian Holm there to prove that point. I
No,
think what could have been really interesting, who I think it was our friend Jeff Zhang that tweeted this, saying that while this wouldn't have incredibly fixed the issue, but
yes, this
what
theory I love. Yes,
yeah, where maybe it was actually the character of Andy that had to play both of those roles, both like the Romulus slash Remus side of it. And then I thought how you could actually make that work in execution. You remember in the two Matrix sequels, Reloaded and Revolutions, there was a character named Bane, played by Ian Bliss, who was also just in Late Night with the Devil not too long ago. There's a moment in that third movie where he clearly is evoking the mannerisms of Hugo Weaving's Agent Smith, as if Agent Smith was coming into the real world. And his performance was a beautiful mirroring of that actor. And I'm not saying that this is what should have happened, but what if someone like David Johnson was able to beautifully mirror the mannerisms of Ian Holm, that we all of a sudden started seeing Ash in a different physical form? I feel like that's where that synergy maybe could have even been more interesting, and the whole AI topic could have even been more interesting in retrospect. Then, there was a huge missed opportunity here, and I don't think it works in the film that we got.
I agree. I mean, especially if you want to wrestle with the idea of these androids, these synthetics, should we trust them or not?
Yeah.
That would be a fascinating duality, especially
Yeah.
because one of these other characters, is it Tyler? No, it's not Tyler.
It's not
is
Tyler. It's Bjorn. It's
Bjorn.
Bjorn. Yeah.
Bjorn is the antithesis to Rain, where we find out at one point that his mother had died as a result of an android making a decision that saved lives, but it came at the cost of a few others, including
Yeah.
his own mother, who died in
Yeah.
that specific incident.
Yeah.
So he is the Will Smith character from iRobot in this movie.
Basically, yeah, that's
Doesn't
basically it.
trust these robots. He doesn't trust the synthetics. Now, as it is in the film, they just don't explore it enough for it to have any
They
sort
don't.
of value.
They don't.
It
Yeah.
is, again, hollow. I see the idea. I recognize it to those that want us to see those things. I see
Yeah.
it. I
But
see
there's
you.
no emotional resolution.
Exactly. It
around
doesn't
that.
crystallize into anything
Yeah.
fascinating to me. It's all very superficial, but I do think you add an interesting complexity if it's two Andys where one of them is the embodiment of, yeah, you can trust this, and then you get the Ash embodiment through the other Andy.
Yeah.
And then you let these characters, especially Bjorn and Rain, you give them a few more scenes to really flesh that out. Then I think you have something compelling on your hands. But you don't need to invoke the likeness of Ian Holm, especially when I think about the way Alien utilizes Ash as Ian Holm as well. And you noted earlier, Bishop in Aliens is a completely different android, the likeness of a completely different person. But similarly, you like the greatness, or part of the greatness of Aliens is that, yes, it is Ripley having to grapple with being in the presence of another android.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter that it doesn't look like Ian Holm. That's still effective in that movie.
But yeah.
So
yeah.
why do we have to invoke the likeness of Ian Holm? Because we're trying to look back at the franchise in its entirety because we're trying to do this Force Awakens formula thing. I don't know.
I
But
mean,
it, like the
it's certainly more
utilization
Rogue
of
One
those,
than it is The Force Awakens.
yeah, it just, but it also just is like, what is the purpose of these two androids in this film? Because you have Rook, who is essentially Ash, doing things that are very clearly against these characters and working for the company. And then Andy, who has been programmed to take care of Rain, all of a sudden is an assistant to Rook now. What
Yeah.
because like I just don't understand what the purpose
It
of any of that is, especially because there's no arc to it. By the end of the film, Rain and Andy end up exactly where they were at the beginning of this film.
the wrestling with that idea of AI becomes undermined simply given the fact that the character of Rook is here in the first place. The callback to
Yes,
Ian
that's
Holm,
it. Yeah.
that's the problem. I mean, if anything, maybe the film just confirms for us that these synthetics, they all come off an assembly line, so that's why they look the same. Okay, I don't care about that. I can assume that that's the case if the company's making
Yeah.
mass productions of Ashes and Rooks and whatever their character names end up being on different missions. I can assume that that's what's happening around this time. But that's not what I care to know. I want to see that duality of AI and our relationship with AI explored further, because that is a potentially interesting avenue that the film could have distinguished for itself within this franchise.
Yeah.
There are actually a few interesting avenues here that the film could have honed in on a bit more. There's another one I want to get to later, but with regard to its ideas on AI, I think that right there is why it's a
Yeah.
missed opportunity.
I completely agree. Rook undermines ambiguity and the internal conflict that would come about with Andy simply because of being reprogrammed, becomes someone that they can't trust because they don't know what's going on with him.
Right.
But the
exactly.
moment you introduce Rook, it gives the audience someone to blame. We know what's really going on here.
Yeah.
And who's manipulating Andy. So it undermines the mystery.
Well, now
it
we have a clear
undermines the
bad guy,
drama,
right? We
There's
have
a clear
yeah.
antagonist. And I think if you remove that character altogether and Andy takes this turn, all of a sudden there's more of a mystery, especially with the characters, as to why is Andy acting this way. They do that a little bit. Bjorn and to a degree Rain and Tyler are a little confused as to why Andy all of a sudden starts acting abnormal given who he is set up to be at the beginning of the film. But we as the audience know, like it completely takes out all of that mystery and drama.
And that's
we're
not
just waiting
knock.
for these characters to catch up. That's all that it's doing.
It's the wrong kind of dramatic irony by putting us too many steps ahead of the other characters. And that's not to knock David Johnson's performance, because I actually think he's very good at straddling that line.
I love him here.
Yeah. So he's not the issue. Really, the performances here aren't the issue. If I find any of the characters a little bit underwritten or underwhelming, it's really due to how the film utilizes them. Because the other big idea that I think this film could have explored a little bit more that I thought was potentially interesting is regarding the Kay character played by Isabella Merced.
Yeah.
And in a way, I almost wish she was the main character, given where she ends up. There's an almost immaculate first omen kind of thing that happens, we'll simply say. And I guess we can talk about the third act and where this film goes.
Yeah, we're in spoilers. We might as well.
It is revealed when they're up in space that she is pregnant. It's revealed in a very plot-like way. And the way it's revealed, my first thought was, well, that's not going to be the last time we hear about that. That's going to play a part somewhere in this movie. And it does. Basically, we find out that the I guess the black goo from Prometheus was being mined and experimented on in different ways, and it could basically allow humans to feel more, I guess, superhuman, more more protective in different environments.
They want the perfect specimen.
Yeah.
For humans, right? That's how the xenomorph has always been classified as it is the perfect specimen. Humans are too fragile for space travel, for going to other planets and
Yeah.
doing all of the mining and everything that the company wants. You can't rely on humans. They die too quickly.
It's basically allowing them to create the perfect organism through humanity, which is not like I don't hate that idea. And the way that the K character becomes involved in that, she gets severely injured and decides to dose herself with this black goo, which means when we get to the quote unquote fourth act of this movie, and most alien films have a fourth act, she gives birth to what essentially looks like a giant hybrid of a xenomorph and the engineers from Prometheus. And this thing then goes on a wacky killing spree. I okay, like first off, that idea I feel like has been done before in this franchise. It's very similar to Alien Resurrection. That's the Alien Resurrection callback that I was thinking about. So I don't know if it's that big of a swing that most people are calling it. It's an interesting idea. But where I think it loses itself for me is the way that Kay herself is involved in that, because this thing that she gives birth to, it just kills her off screen. And I kind of wish that there was more of a motherly recognition of what she just gave birth to. And it's hard to do that in just a final act, but maybe this could have come beforehand. Maybe this could have been like an interesting exploratory thing that then expands on this franchise's already good ideas on motherhood. Like there's a potentially interesting thing there I feel like the film could have done, and sadly I think the film just wastes the K character and what potential that could have been for just thrill. And I found that unfortunate in the same ways that we did with the AI stuff as well.
Yeah, again, it's another missed opportunity because the film doesn't do anything interesting with it. And I do think there was an ample opportunity to maybe deconstruct Aliens in this fascinating way. What's great about Aliens is that it's one of the best films ever. I don't care what kind of movie you're talking about. I think it is one of the best films ever to explore motherhood.
It's a Mother's Day movie.
Ideas in that film is extraordinary. And here's an opportunity for the film to complement that in this interesting way, because in Aliens, obviously the familial dynamic is something that is formed organically as these characters come together, but it's not a blood family. This is doing something different. And of course, now the xenomorph is involved in a way as well. So it's a way for the film to kind of, I guess, accumulate everything into one moment, but it's brief. Again, like we were talking about with some of the stuff with Bjorn and the duality that could come with Andy, it all feels very fleeting. It happens quickly. The film doesn't expound on it in any sort of way. It just shows us these things without having anything to say.
It does.
That frustrating. And the other thing too, not only does it forego thematic bite, I think it does so simply for, again, the Force Awakens formula without being subversive. That's what makes the Force Awakens great. It brings up all these things, flips the coin to say, hey, we're doing something new and different, interesting. Where here it's, hey, you guys
it treats those stories as myth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Romulus, it's, hey, you guys remember all the motherhood stuff in Aliens?
Yeah.
Isn't that cool? We're going to kind of reference that here.
It's what was it? Was it South Park that talked about the member berries or something like that? I think it was. That's essentially what this movie is doing.
And even though we did the Aliens 3 composition earlier in the film, what if we did that again, but this time with the hybrid creature? So we're going to do it again for a second time.
Yeah.
And then to your point earlier, let's just kill Kay off screen, even though she's one of the more fascinating characters here and pivotal to the potential mother commentary that we could throw into this film. And even when it comes to the creature itself, what if we did nothing with the character except throw him in for some dramatic urgency and then kill him?
Yeah.
How fun is that? I don't know.
Well,
Maybe.
it's more.
I don't know.
I found it unfortunate too because I do think David Johnson gives the best performance in the movie. But my second favorite performance here is actually Isabella Merced. And I love Kaylee Spaney. I think she's really good here. I think she has more to do here for sure. But I think Isabella Merced was really committed to this material and the potential grossness of it. And I think she's really good in those sequences leading up to this weird birth that she has.
I
But
mean,
this,
those scenes as the xenomorph is hunting her,
Mhm.
the fear and trembling anxiety on her face is incredible.
I
It's
will admit,
really good.
I think my other big problem with this movie is I just didn't find it particularly scary, which I know is more of a me thing, but it does feel like the film's editing was very desperate to get to the next alien-like thing that you remember, that the editing just felt a little bit off as far as it functioning as a successful horror movie. But the scene involving Kay when she is being hunted like that, that was the most unnerving scene in the movie for me, primarily because of Isabella Merced's performance and how she
It's
sells
so
that
good.
fear.
I
Yeah.
will say in IMAX, the sound design there is also great. The production
Oh,
design
sure.
of it is also very good. I will
Yeah, I can
always,
imagine.
always, always champion the craft of this film. It is
So well made.
so
It's so
remarkable.
well made.
The sound design, specifically, though, in that moment, is fantastic. But what makes it striking is her performance. It
Yeah.
is that palpable fear that she is exhibiting
Yeah.
there. Absolutely
Yeah.
fantastic. And how that goes to 11 when she knows the xenomorph is approaching and they're on the other side of the door, and will Andy open
That
the door?
recognition.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Well, it's
that whole
also
sequence is great.
the chestburster scene involving Eileen Woon's character of Navarro, I believe her
Yeah,
name is. The chest burst itself is nothing new or extraordinary. It's still pretty visceral. It's still pretty effective for what it is. But what makes it effective, it's Isabella Merced's scream. That
yeah.
blood
Oh
curdling
yeah,
scream she gives,
there at
I
the
think,
end. Yeah,
again, like, I feel like we're sometimes talking a bit hyperbolically and how frustrated we were with this movie. When we're so frustrated with a movie, we tend to emphasize the things that are really good and then emphasize the things that are really bad in a maybe extreme way. But I think her scream there is one of the best horror screams I've ever heard. I do think it's genuinely that
yeah,
good and really makes the scene. And it just, once again, amplifies how frustrating this movie is for me, like it
yeah,
is for you. Like this is simultaneously the best movie of the year and my least favorite movie of the year.
yeah.
And
That's
sometimes those same things
yeah.
happen in the same scene.
And look, I know a lot of people really do like this film, and I think my frustration stems from really two things. One,
Hmm.
again, the craft is extremely evocative. It is
Yeah.
really, really great. And you want the material that makes up that, or that fills that production. You want that to
Yeah.
live up to the same level
Yeah.
of quality. The other thing too, I love The Force Awakens. To
I do
me,
too.
that is the second best Star Wars movie. I think
I
it
wouldn't go
is
that far, but I do really like it. I'm quite a
really,
fan
really
of it.
good.
Yeah.
I think it is fantastic. So it is not at all a criticism or even something I'm reserved about when you say, hey, this reminds me of The Force Awakens. The moment you do that, you have piqued my interest. Okay,
Hmm.
this is The Force Awakens, but for the Alien franchise. All right, I am totally here for that because, and again, I
Yeah.
will die on this hill that The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi are two great Star
Yeah.
Wars movies that are both subversive in their own ways.
Yeah.
So you have my attention,
Hmm.
but this doesn't do that. Again, it's just an
It's not.
imitation. And
It's
you know,
yeah.
but I think the potential is there. The opportunity is there for this film to do the same thing The Force Awakens did, to remind us of what makes the Alien franchise so great and then subversively comment on it. And the thing with Romulus, the its vapidness is frustrating because this is a franchise again that is built upon that thematic bite. It
And
has
that
all the superficial
deconstruction,
thrill.
that same deconstruction that we're talking about.
Exactly. Like it has the production value, it has the performances, it has the scares. I love all of that about these films as well. But all of them in their own way try to have something on their mind. They want to say something. And I don't
Yeah.
know what this film is saying other than, hey, this franchise is awesome.
It's
And
saying
that's just not
Alien.
interesting to me.
It's saying Alien is basically what it's saying.
Yeah.
Alien movie. I think it's just funny how so many people are comparing this to The Force Awakens because I think it further proves how many people out there still don't quite understand The Force Awakens and how
Yeah.
that movie actually was doing a pretty good job setting up the unpredictability of The Last Jedi. There was a synergy there between those two movies, which is why
Yeah.
that whole story probably should have just been its own trilogy until we got the Rise of Skywalker to completely break the bank. But this movie, Alien Romulus, is not really doing The Force Awakens. It's doing the formula of The Force Awakens, but it's not taking its thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, if anything,
Yes.
this is even some of the Rogue One comparisons I've seen are a little bit baffling to me. Like this reminds me more of Scream 5, if I'm being honest, and how it fit within that franchise, and how behind the curve that one felt in comparison to its predecessors.
Yeah. No, I think that's very fair. And honestly, I'm right there with you. And that to me is why I'm so frustrated with this film, because I do see that this could have been great. It had all the pieces to be really great, and it just doesn't care to delve into its themes in an invigorating way,
Mhm.
in a way that like do anything with them. Like
Well,
just do anything. I don't care if you falter, just do something.
let me ask you this, because okay, with someone like Ridley Scott, who's also a producer on this movie, while he didn't direct it, he is a producer on this. Ridley Scott is someone who is known for always tinkering with his work. He's known for the quote unquote director's cut, right? And the Alien franchise is also sort of known for having alternate cuts that sometimes improve on the theatrical cuts. I would say in some cases it's not so much the case. I think the original Alien, Ridley Scott's Alien, was pretty much perfect when it first came out. The director's cut of that film I don't think is an improvement. But I think the special edition of Aliens is an improvement. Of course, the assembly cut of Alien 3 is an improvement. I bring that up to say I wouldn't be surprised if Alien Romulus was maybe softened a bit in the editing room, a little bit too much.
Perhaps.
I do wonder if
Yeah.
there was, because even the pacing of the film itself, while it is very thrilling and very quick-witted, it does sometimes undermine the potential horror for me at times. Like I said earlier, I admittedly didn't find the movie all that scary. And I think a lot of it is maybe due to the editing, because I felt like it was just trying to quickly get to the next thing that you might remember. Or,
Yeah.
here's Ian Holm once again to give you some new exposition or some new things that you might need to know.
Yeah.
And the interplay between all of that did feel a little off to me. And I wonder if there's maybe another version of this movie that could have tightened things up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair, and I wouldn't be surprised if that is the case, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch that was left out of the left on the cutting room floor, rather,
Yeah,
especially
maybe.
the interactions between Andy and Rook. I'm curious if there
Yeah.
was more there, because their interplay here, I feel like, is thoughtless in terms of the approach, with at least how it comes off in this version.
Yeah.
I do wonder if there was maybe more to the film originally that articulated some sort of duality between those two characters.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really know. But ultimately, how it plays out here is that Andy is just the arms and the legs for a Rook character that is otherwise, stationed in one place. Like he can't move. And it's just disappointing to me that, or how that deflates the dramatic urgency of this film at times.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Uh,
Completely with you.
at any rate, a couple of things that I just want to emphasize once again, because I know we've talked a lot about the lack of thematic bite here and how vapid the film is
Yeah.
in that regard and why that's disappointing. But I will say, in terms of the drama itself, the action, the horror of the film, there is a lot to this film that I really did appreciate. And you
Sure.
noted a couple of those scenes, such as Kay hiding from the xenomorph as it's hunting her. The moment of Rain shooting the xenomorphs in 0G and the acid blood kind of floating around, I thought was
Yeah.
an inventive idea.
When I saw that in my theater, I thought to myself, I made a severe mistake not seeing this in IMAX.
Yeah, it was incredible in IMAX.
Yeah, and I will give this film credit for at least doing something new within the franchise, not necessarily thematically, but it has an interesting idea by finally utilizing the xenomorph's blood in a very dangerous way.
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
yeah, because there
and
are
very
so
new.
many.
That was a
Yeah.
new thing.
Yeah, that was a very new thing. We haven't really, because we've always known of their acid blood, but a lot of times we don't really sense how dangerous that is, at least not since the first Alien. And in this movie,
Yeah.
it almost becomes a plot point with how dangerous
Yeah.
that blood is.
Yeah,
And I
because
like
we
that.
see its effect on the human body as well.
We see we see just the blood kill somebody. Like
Yeah.
this is is that the first time we've actually seen that happen in
I
this
I was
franchise?
I'm looking, trying to think back. I know I haven't seen Resurrections in a while, but I think that is the first time we've seen it kill a human
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Yeah, yeah. So that was at least interesting.
I agree. I really liked all of that. The moment of Bjorn and Kay in Navarro getting into the ship. This
Mhm.
is somewhat early on, and they're trying to leave, but they get swung back into the space station.
Yeah,
Again, there is a gorgeous tangibility to that whole sequence that is fantastic. Like, there is a weight
Yeah.
to it, and I know that there's a lot of digital effects going on there, but when you couple that with the intercuts to them inside the craft and all of the analog practicality of the set design, it's just fantastic. Like, you
I
just
agree.
there's a weight to this film with its visuals and its production that sadly we just don't see anymore.
We
And-
don't.
and
It's
that-
a gorgeous looking movie.
That will absolutely give this film something in the world of modern blockbusters that I will always appreciate.
Yeah.
Because you got this, you got Dune, and that's about it. Like,
Yeah.
there's really not
mean-
much else that's outside of the CGI soup we get.
I mean, maybe Furiosa, I guess, can fall into that. But that's still,
Furiosa, I would classify Furiosa in that. Weirdly, the
Yeah.
creator, in terms of world building anyway, and looks, I'd say
Honestly,
fall in this.
this actually feels very reminiscent of the creator. At least the way I walked
Yeah.
out of the creator feeling, it's very similar to how I feel about Alien Romulus.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
100% how I felt as well.
Mhm.
So I at least wanted to know that there are some really great things here that I really do appreciate. The visual flair to the film is just it's mesmerizing.
The cinematography here, Gallo Olivares, I believe his name is. It's so good. Assuming we get 5 more movies later on this year that are worthy of being nominated for best cinematography
Yeah.
at the Oscars. But if the year were to end right now, I think Alien
in.
Romulus is a front runner for that in some
He
ways.
is. And I believe it was Will Mavity on Twitter noted that he was the original director of photography on Roma, but for some
Oh.
reason, for reasons that I don't think are public, he ended up only getting a camera operator credit, where Carone himself took the DP credit.
Really? I did
And
not
some
know
of the crew
that.
was not very happy about that and leaked the original list, which had him as co-DP on that film. So
Wow.
he was, by all accounts, the director of photography on Romulus. So we know that he can
Yeah,
do cinematography very well, and boy does it
yeah.
come through in this movie.
Well, and even so, let's say hypothetically he was the core cinematographer in a movie like Roma. The stillness of that movie does translate to the stillness of Romulus. And for a
Yeah.
movie that is this big and moves quickly, it is a blockbuster, as we keep talking about, but it does have a bit of a stillness to it that you don't often see. And
Yeah.
I also appreciated that.
All $80 million of this film is on the screen.
It
And
is. Yeah, and
I love that about it.
it looks awesome. Minus Ian
Yeah.
Holm, but it looks awesome.
There are a few exceptions. I know we didn't get into it as much or in detail, but the xenomorph baby human hybrid at the end of this film, I feel the same way about Ian Holm, in the sense that that's another effect here that is so jarring to me,
Mhm.
because everything else is so lived in and so
Yeah.
tangible that you throw this grotesque creature into the mix and it's like, man, this is like from a different movie. This does not belong here.
Yeah. Who was it? I think it was someone I was engaging with on Twitter. Oh, it was our friend Diego Crespo. When I talked about how I feel like, given her arc, Isabella Merced maybe should have been the main character in some ways. He actually quote tweeted that, or at least replied and said, he thought there was going to be another final girl switch at the end of this.
Yeah.
And like that could have been potentially
That could've been.
interesting in a way, because that first Alien was all about not knowing who was going to survive and who wasn't. And then it ended up being Sigourney Weaver's Ripley. So
Yeah.
this could have been another opportunity for Romulus to maybe surprise you on the who of all of that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't do that. But again, like I feel like the basis of this whole review we just had was how so many of the potentially interesting things here just end up becoming missed opportunities.
Yeah.
And that's basically the
and,
thesis here.
and that's the thing. And sorry to keep coming back to this, but it
Mhm.
is the comparison that everyone has been making. And I think it is actually extremely apt for
Yeah.
this conversation and Romulus, given the formula that it steals. When I think of The Force Awakens and I think of Kylo Ren,
Mhm.
and the way he carries himself like a Darth Vader figure, has the
Yeah.
mask, everything. That is a film that is invoking the familiar and wanting to subvert that, right? So
Yeah.
what we
And
find
using it
out
as a
is
literal
that
facade.
it's a literal facade. We find
Yeah.
out that Kylo Ren wants to be Darth Vader, but is anything but. He
Yeah.
is immature. He doesn't have the power. He is nothing close to the power of Vader.
Right.
And I think about that in the context of what you were just saying there with Rain in this film, how they invoke her through Ripley-esque imagery, where she's in the elevator and she has the gun, which is clearly an homage to Aliens.
Yeah, and then
And
Tyler sort of takes on the role of Michael Biehn in a way, the way he teaches her how to use the gun.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so the film is clearly doing that. And there are some compositions that feel, it's not quite verbatim, but feels pretty close to verbatim to Aliens. Or you think about how, again, as we see in Alien from 1979, the Scott film, they get away in the ship, but
Yeah.
there's
There's a fourth
of
act.
course, exactly. There's an addendum to the movie. There's one more moment of urgency we got to escape from.
Yeah.
And what does Rain do? She gets into the closet. She has to put on the spacesuit. Like it is
Mhm.
it
See-
clearly invoking Ripley once again. And
Yeah.
and so I bring up Kylo Ren to emphasize that The Force Awakens is doing that on purpose and subverting that. But this is a film that doesn't do anything to subvert the Ripley
No, no.
mechanics of those films. It's just homaging them. Like that's
see,
it.
yeah.
It's just an imitation.
Because The Force Awakens was using it to say Kylo Ren is this movie's Darth Vader, but we're using it to also say he is not at all Darth Vader. So it was having it both ways in a way. Alien Romulus is just having the first half of that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I don't mind those kind of homages, but if there's any type
Yeah.
of deconstructionist effect happening, then it makes it more interesting. But that's not what's happening here. And
Yeah.
we do get shots, we do get moments that feel like very direct recreations, not even just callbacks, but recreations
Yeah.
from other films in
Recreations.
this
Exactly.
franchise. And we also get, what did you think of Andy saying, "Get away from her, you bitch"?
Look, and I know some people have had an issue with this as well.
But it's like, by
Like,
that point, did it even phase you because the movie was so drowned in its callbacks and its nostalgia that it's like, okay, you kind
yeah,
of knew
it's
at
so
some point someone
brazen.
was
It's like
going to say it.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could see it coming a mile away. You
Yeah.
knew that it was going to happen as soon as he shoots him in the head. There, you knew it was coming.
I know. Yeah.
Especially because, like, right before there were several shots invoking aliens. It was coming.
Yeah.
Like, it's fine. I don't mind it.
Yeah.
I don't mind the imagery. I don't mind the homages. What I do mind is the vapid approach to them.
The lack of new context to
The
utilize
lack
them in
of
a new, yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
We're just doing it to do it.
Yeah.
And look, if people enjoy that, that's fine. That's totally fine. I have no
yeah.
issue with people liking this film as an imitation of the entire Alien franchise and all of these callbacks that it has.
It's
That's-
going to be a litmus test. This film will be a litmus test for the fans of this franchise as to whether you prefer the thrill and its grungy aesthetics, or do you prefer the thematic bite and the bold swings it's taking.
Yeah.
And again, that thematic bite doesn't have to come into it doesn't have to come in the form of the philosophizing of Prometheus and Covenant. It's what's always been there in the whole franchise. Prometheus and Covenant just did it in a very different kind of way.
That's it.
Still,
like Alien and Aliens and Alien 3, I wouldn't say like those films aren't philosophizing. They're not
but they
bogged
have
down in this
deep
giant
themes.
exposition.
Yeah, they have deep themes. Even Alien Resurrection has some really twisted ideas on its mind around crossbreeding, and even the idea of motherhood with the newborn at the end is actually kind of grossly interesting. So ideas have always been the thesis, or at least the ethos, of the Alien franchise. And this film's idea is what's in the best interest of the company, aka what's in the best interest of Disney, is what it feels like, really. Yeah,
absolutely. What's in the best interest of the company? That is obviously a big through line in this film as well, through the character, and that's another aspect of this film that feels redundant.
But see, this is where,
also hollow.
Well, this is where I think maybe in 10 or 20 years, like I said earlier, will that be the thing that makes me look back on this movie more positively, as if to say, okay, maybe it is having a conversation with the franchise and the fans and itself in a way that's maybe similar to how a Scream film would. And I don't know if that's possible. Maybe it's just me trying to give too much credit to a movie that I'm simply trying to love. Like, I want to find these things. I want to love this movie so much, and I'm just not there.
Unless that's equally thin in the same way that you could say Tim Burton's Dumbo was a Disney movie making fun of Disney.
That's actually a really good comparison. I think that's a very fair analogy there. Oh man, that movie Dumbo could have been so interesting.
It could have been. And it's like, yeah, I love the idea.
Yeah.
Does that film fully realize Disney making fun of Disney? Not really.
No.
And that could be applicable here. It's an interesting idea. Is this film really having a conversation about the corporation? I don't know. Like, how far does that really go, though?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to see it again, to see if there is anything else there, or I might sadly have this. Where do you have this ranked in the Alien franchise as of now between the seven core films here?
I have this just above Resurrections, but again, I need to revisit that film. It has been quite a few years. I have not seen it in a long time. And so this is, I guess, TBD, because I do hope to catch up with Resurrections once again. I would also love to rewatch Covenant to see if
Yeah.
its nihilism is as suffocating as it was the first time around.
Yeah. I think that's fair. And again, I think Resurrection and Covenant are two movies that if I know you well enough, I think you'll at least appreciate them a little bit more, but I don't think you'll come around on them in the same ways that even I have. I think you'll
Yeah.
still have a lot of reservations about both movies. I will say, if you do revisit Covenant, try to think of it as sort of like a dark and twisted gothic Frankenstein movie, like a mad scientist movie. And
Okay.
then I think it gets interesting. At
But
this
then
point now,
that doesn't feel like an alien movie though. That's
that's what I
problem.
like about it.
But that's
the idea
been a
of
lot.
alien
That's all
being-
my criticism of Romulus is like, okay, could this have been an interesting sci-fi movie that exists on its own terms if you just replace the xenomorph with something else? You know, like maybe. I mean, because there's a lot here that is fascinating. It just doesn't feel like an alien movie, though.
When you think of the Alien franchise as the quote unquote creation in a meta way, I think it makes that movie more interesting. The idea of creation and how that franchise itself is Ridley Scott's creation. That's where I find the movie kind of interesting. But I mean, we're obviously here not to review Covenant once again. I say all that to say Alien Romulus right now is my least favorite of the seven. And I really wanted to like it more. I really did, but I prefer when these movies try to go for something. Even a movie like Prometheus, like we talked about earlier, I don't really care for that film all that much. I don't think it's all that successful, but I at least applaud it for trying to do something. And just that simple thing is what makes me like it more than Romulus.
That is a lot of words to get there once again. Because I haven't always liked some of the ideas these films have brought up.
Yeah.
Alien 3, I really like. I do think that is still a flawed experience.
Yeah.
Prometheus, I don't care for, but that is a film that is clearly aiming for something beyond what we see there on the surface.
Right.
Same thing with Covenant. I don't like where Covenant goes, but it is clear that there are things on Ridley Scott's mind when it comes to that film.
Yeah.
I don't know what Romulus is doing. It doesn't feel like it cares to engage. It doesn't care to have anything on its mind. And this is a franchise, whether it works or not, and I don't think it always does, but they at least go for something. And I don't know if Romulus does.
Well, I would like to see Fede Álvarez try his hand at this franchise again because I think he is a good director for it.
I agree.
I would like to see if they are going to make another one of these. I actually wouldn't mind if they do bring Fede Álvarez back, and I want to see if he can actually bring some of that intrigue into his film once again. Because I think he can. Don't Breathe and Evil Dead are not thin movies. Like there's a grossness to both of them in their own respective ways, but they do have ideas on their mind. They're not the most complicated movies, but they have ideas. And I want to see him bring that sensibility once again to this franchise. I think he said in an interview he would actually like to do an Alien versus Predator movie, but he would like to partner with Dan Trachtenberg and they do it as a dual directing job.
Yeah.
That's not a terrible idea.
That would be cool. I'd be down. Yeah, I'd be down.
Yeah,
me too.
Look,
I'm with you. I'm not against Fede Álvarez coming back. I don't know if I need him to write the screenplay. Maybe bring in someone else for that. But
I mean, he has co-written all of his movies, aside from Girl in the Spider's Web. I think it's more so how can his abilities as a storyteller, how is he able to disconnect from how the corporation wants him to do things?
Yeah.
And that disparity, I think, is not what this movie was able to capitalize on.
Yeah, that's very fair. I will end my thoughts with this nugget from friend of the show, DJ Valentine, who said, Alien Romulus is like watching a cover band for a group you love, who very much looks the part, but mumbles through most of the hit songs, not rhyming, and occasionally blurts out a part of that hook that you remember, even if it's out of order. And I thought that was perfect.
Yeah, it's like an out of tune version of the Beatles.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
I wanted to love this film. I just couldn't get
Same.
there.
Yeah, I'm
Do you
with you,
have
man.
any final thoughts on Romulus?
I will still give it a second try sometime soon because I know the Alien franchise and all these films in this franchise have been subject to reevaluation. And maybe there is something here in Romulus that I'm just missing. And I want there to be. I want to
Yeah.
find something. I really do, because I think there are so many great things here that you can't ignore. I worry that I'm not going to get there. The way I feel about this movie is similar to how we felt about Scream 5 when that first came out. We really felt like that film was very much behind the curve. The first time the Scream franchise felt behind the curve as opposed to ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And that's similarly to how I feel with Alien Romulus. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I hope to come around on it sometime though.
I'm with you. I'm fascinated to give this another go in a few years. I'm curious in another 5 to 10. Maybe we'll look back at this episode and go, man, we were way off.
We really
base
missed
there."
something here. Yeah.
And that wouldn't be the first time, but as it stands now on this first viewing, this is where I'm at. These are my honest thoughts on the film. I'm not trying to do this for clicks or for attention.
as you got accused for. I thought that was hilarious.
Like, come on. Since when have we ever done anything for clicks or attention? I mean, it's understandable. Not everyone listens to the show or knows who we are. That's perfectly fine. But I did find that very funny because people that know us and listen to the show will know that is way off base. But
right.
Look, I'm not afraid to admit if in another 5 to 10 years, if this is reevaluated and people look at it as one of the best films in the franchise, and I come around to sharing that opinion, that's fine. I will admit that.
That's exciting. That's exciting when that happens, right?
I agree. So, or maybe I will maintain that this is one of the most flawed films in the franchise for all the reasons we stated here. I don't know, but I am curious. I'm curious to see where it goes.
It could be a time capsule thing once again. All these movies have been time capsules in their own respective ways.
With all of that said, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reach out to us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. Let us know how you feel. You can always email us on sessionfilm@gmail.com. All right. Stay tuned for this week's main show as we will begin a series of weeks as we get into our retrospectives here.
Yeah.
As you may know, if you heard last week's show, episode 599 will be our 2000 retrospective, the year 2000.
Yeah.
And then 600 will be our best of the decade for the 2000s.
Yeah,
because we are doing those shows back to back, it doesn't leave us space to do best scenes of the decade. The last time we did this, it was the week before we did that best of the decade awards for the 2010s. So we are actually jumping the gun a little bit.
Yeah.
On this week's main show, we are going to be doing our top 5 scenes of the 2000s. So we are somewhat beginning our best of the decade awards this week. We're going to be doing best scenes. So you're going to want to stick around for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of great scenes to narrow down. I don't know how we're going to choose just 5, but that's part
stressful.
of the fun here.
That's stressful.
Look forward to that. And then, of course, the 2000 retrospective the following week and our best of the 2000s the week after that. So
absolutely
a lot going on here. We'll have a review for Sing Sing this week as well, if all goes well. So it's a busy week once again.
Yeah.
With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Film looks great. I don't love it, but it looks awesome.
Face huggers rule.